Good morning. Good morning, and thank you for tuning into another episode of Live with Senior Trade Shows. Live with Senior Trade Shows is a virtual show that features various subject matter experts to empower seniors, caregivers, veterans, and their families through education and resources. We discuss various topics and provide resources that can help our audience make informed decisions. My name is 𝗃𝗂𝗃𝐻𝗃, your host for today, and I hope that your day is going great. I thank you for tuning in once again. So I'll be introducing today's hot topic, and we will be discussing how to manage grief during COVID-19. We all know this past 1 year has been really tough for everyone. So many people have lost loved ones. I personally have lost a close family friend to COVID, and it hasn't been easy adjusting to that fact. I'm still trying to figure out how to interact. Just knowing that I would not be able to interact with that individual again has been really, really tough, you know. So I'm sure that we all know someone who has lost their life to COVID or lost a family member due to COVID. So managing grief can be really tough, and we are excited to partner with crisis counselors from the Gulf Coast Center. They have a program called the Texas Recovery Together program, and we have invited them to use our platform to offer free information that can help you grieve or manage your loss. So help me welcome Frank and Mary as I bring them onto the platform.
Thank you, Esther.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you all doing today?
We're doing well. Thank you for having us.
Sure, sure. So I just welcomed our audience, and I've already told them that you all are from the Gulf Coast Center, and today's topic is about managing grief during this pandemic, and you all will be educating them about how to do so effectively. I shared earlier while I was introducing myself how I lost not my family member, but a friend of a family member. My friend's father, passed due to COVID, and I know him personally. No one wants to ever lose someone. It's really tough. It's really difficult. Just knowing that you'll never be able to interact with that person, it can be really, really daunting. And not everyone knows how to manage loss or grief well. So we're glad we brought you on here to share with our audience how they can effectively manage loss, especially in this time where there's been so many deaths and so many lives have been lost. So welcome once again.
Thank you, Esther. Again, thank you for having us. My name is Maria Gonzalez, and I have here with me Frank Chapa, who is my colleague. We're both, and Lisa Taylor, she's also here with us. But we're both, or three of us, are crisis counselor with Gulf Coast Center, Texas Recovering Together program, which is the Gulf Coast Center's latest Texans Recovering Together. So basically, we provide or we are offering free confidential services for anyone affected by COVID-19 or the recently winter storm we had in Brazoria and Galveston counties. So basically what we do, I like to say that we are empathetic counselors that are here to listen and understand and guide you through some, your stressors. Like Esther, I did also lose somebody, my uncle, from COVID. So, having these coping skills that Frank will be talking about has been very helpful during this period of us losing somebody we care about. But another thing we like to do is we do provide available workshops or presentations like these to any organizations on a variety of mental health related topics that could include things like self-care, stress management, coping skills, problem solving, and many more. Our services are done either in English, Spanish, and Urdu as well. So you'll be able to find some information through our website, which we will provide more detailed information at the end of this presentation. But I would like to turn this over and we'll get right to the topic of grief during COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria, for the introduction. Hi, folks. Again, my name is Frank, and I am a crisis counselor with Maria. And my background is in clinical psychology. So I have a background in talking about and dealing with many life issues like this one. And there's a little quote here that we're gonna that you can read for yourself. When we're talking about grief today, I want to start by making sure that I clearly define what it is we're trying to do here. Grieving is a very personal and difficult process for many folks, and today's lecture is discussion is not meant to help you circumvent and go around the pain. Unfortunately, it's also, grieving is a very personal process. It's different culturally. Some places, I was invited once to an Irish wake, and that was a new experience for me. Very different from other wakes that I had been to. For example, in some places you wear black, in some places you wear purple. There's no right way to grieve. What today's presentation is hoping to do is help to somewhat inoculate you. It's like a vaccine that will help you better cope with the stress and the different feelings and thoughts and experiences that you will have when you grieve. Loss is something that will come to everyone. It's part of the human condition. And so many of you will have already potentially had that grieving process experience and understand what that's like. So you may be no stranger to grief. It may be a little different now because COVID is a novel disease, and some of these losses have been unexpected, which is sometimes a little more difficult. So today's process is like an inoculation, and we're doing that by giving you information. Knowledge is power, of course, and this situation is no different. We're hoping that by explaining what's happening during grieving and by giving you some ideas about how to manage your stress and pain during that grieving process, it's not going to take away the grief. It will hopefully help you process all of the things and your feelings and the experiences a little better. So with that said, I'll start by defining what we're talking about when we talk about grief today. So grief, as we've written here, is a reaction to major loss of someone or something, and that's important because while the main theme today has been the loss of a loved one or someone you know, we're also talking about the loss of various things. And of course, these are usually accompanied with unhappiness and painful emotion. It can be triggered by the death of someone, but also we're talking about the general feeling of loss, and that can be triggered by someone's death or various other things. And Maria, if you go to the next slide. When I talk about loss, this can be all kinds of things. We're talking about you having an idea of who you are, and sometimes the people in your life define who you are. And when you have a loss of that, that changes a lot of things inside you. It changes maybe how you define yourself. So if, for example, you lose your job, it would be appropriate to say you're kind of grieving the loss of that job, especially if that's something you know you can't get back. If for the longest time you had a certain profession, or perhaps you had a business, and it seems that it would be difficult or almost impossible to get that type of business back. Maybe you have to move. That's a big loss of your identity, and you may go through the process of grieving for that. Same if you lost a home. A home is a very personal thing. A lot of folks define themselves by being a homeowner and living in that home for so many years. And if you lost that home, again, you may go through that same grieving process, maybe a little differently than losing a loved one, but still. Again, in business, that can be a loss. The loss of a relationship with someone. Perhaps that person hasn't died, but that relationship has broken. Perhaps a friend or a family member that you're at odds, or something happened and they move away. And the loss of that very special person, again, even though they're still living, the relationship has maybe been a loss, or your support system. Maybe you had certain people in your life that were part of what you were doing, and now they're not. And again, that's a loss, and that changes what your life is like. in a family pet, some folks will say, it was just a cat or just a dog. I have two, I would call them fur children of my own. And I would say that the loss of a pet for me specifically would be, quite devastating, especially since the pandemic, since I've been working mostly from home and mostly by myself. They keep me company, right? The way office mates would have previously. So they've been a bigger part of my life, providing me lots of love and entertainment. So the loss of a pet can be a very impactful thing for someone to and cause the grieving process to begin. Maria, thank you. So again, this slide is just to remind us that people's responses to grief will be different depending on the circumstance of the loss or the death. And there's no right way to grieve. And again, it will be culturally different. And just because you see someone grieve one way does not mean that is the way for you to grieve. Everyone will find their way. But again, what we're going to provide today is some scientifically backed facts about grieving that a lot of folks do go through, and some ideas for how to cope with some of that grief. So what we're talking about here is that, again, reiterating that everyone copes in their own way. And also it's important to recognize that loss is a continuing process. It's going to happen to everyone. It's the human condition. One thing you don't want to do is try to fight it the whole way, because the ultimate goal is to accept the loss, as we'll talk about here in the next stage. And Maria, if you go to the next slide. So here we go. According to David Kessler, he developed this theory in the 70s, and he came up with the idea of stages of grief. I'm sure most of you have heard about processing the stages of grief and how they exist. One thing that's important is to know that the stages of grief are not one then the next and the other then the other, and then you're through. You can go back and forth through them. You may experience some and not others. You may go all the way through to acceptance and then revert back to some of the other feelings. But these general 5 stages have been found to be quite common in the grieving process for folks. And those are denial, otherwise known as avoidance, or maybe confusion, or shock, or fear. The second is anger, otherwise considered frustration, or maybe irritation or anxiety. The next stage is bargaining, otherwise known as feeling overwhelmed, maybe helplessness, feeling hostile as well, or maybe trying to flee or run away from the situation, or feeling like you want to. The fourth stage is depression, in which you be struggling to find meaning, reaching out to others and telling one story. And then finally, we hope to reach the acceptance stage, and where you may be exploring options or new plans or moving on if it's related to something like that. So again, it's not linear. You don't go from 1 through 5 in a straight line, and not everyone goes through them all. But they're just 5 stages, and knowing that these things are going to happen gives you a little more self-compassion. If you start to experience one of these, you would have otherwise said to yourself, why is this happening? Why am I upset in this way? And knowing that you're going through these stages can tell you, and you can tell yourself, you know what, this is healthy and I guess normal to be feeling this way, because I knew and I have heard that I will experience some of these feelings or go through these stages. So for you to be processing things and going through that can be a sign that things are going well. So instead of feeling more upset that you're feeling, let's say, denial or anger, you may be saying, you know what, I knew this might be part of the process. And again, that's sometimes a hard conversation for you to have with yourself at the time that you're feeling grief, but knowing, again, can help you with that. So go to the next slide, thank you. So let's talk about the denial stage. It's considered usually the first stage of grief. And the reason for that is because sometimes news of whatever loss you have heard about is so strong and is so shocking that you almost, your mind almost rejects it outright. What are you talking about? No, that's you know, they're not gone. What are you saying? And it's almost difficult to believe. Again, it's because it's such a core part of you sometimes. If it happens to be a very young loved one, especially, sometimes it's even more difficult to accept, as opposed to someone whom was already perhaps very sick, and there had been hospice care, and folks knew that perhaps this time was coming for them. So sometimes news of a loss, whatever type it may be, can be very hard to accept because it seems so outlandish, or it's very shocking to you. And at that time, you might feel like life makes no sense. You may start to just feel numb. Your body just kind of rejects everything and says, you know what, this is too much stress. I'm going to make a little cocoon around myself and protect myself from this mental anguish. And so you may start to feel a little numb in this stage. You also may find that the world has very little meaning, or you may feel very overwhelmed at that time. And so nothing really seems to matter, or you're just suddenly, you know, having a numbing effect of your thoughts as well. And we all at this time, you're just trying to get through the day. You may still be having folks talk to you and say, you know what, this is awful what's happening, or what happened to you, and you may say, I still can't believe what's happening to me. So that's the denial stage. It happens to help you survive the current stress of the situation. Kind of like, I guess, sometimes your body, let's say, I'll give you an example. I have a slight fear of needles, and when I give blood, even though I'm ready to have the injection or have my blood drawn, and I say, yes, I know I need this and want this, and even though I'm extremely calm in that situation, for whatever reason, once I get my blood drawn, my body just starts to ramp up and create all this adrenaline, and suddenly I have this reaction, and I start to get really woozy, and down I go sometimes. It's been a while since that happened, since I've been doing what I've been doing, but that's my body trying to protect me. It's thinking I'm in danger. And so to do that, it shuts down my body, and I pass out, and my blood pressure gets really low. Well, that's my body trying to protect me. It's saying that there's a very stressful thing going on, so there's no need for me to be awake for this. Let's shut me down and not let the stress get too high. And denial stage is kind of like that. It's trying to help you in its own way to survive the loss, partly by blocking some of that out. So you may find and experience that you go through the denial stage, and when that happens, you'll have a little bit of knowledge about what's going on. Maria, next slide. Okay, the next stage is anger. And again, this may be a stage that you experience with denial and with loss. You may find yourself feeling very upset and frustrated by the situation. You find that perhaps, and there's another stage called bargaining, when you've tried everything, when you feel like you have been wronged perhaps because of this loss, you may find yourself in a deep state of anger or fury. And of course, many folks will tell you, and I'm sure many of you have heard, that behind anger there's a deep sadness, and that rings very true for me personally when I think about what types of situations have caused anger. You will find that you may be very angry in a situation, at yourself, at a higher power, at a person or situation, at others that were around the person who has deceased. So know that when you experience that anger stage, have compassion for yourself, and recognize that this is one of the stages that has been recognized as a way to start coping with that situation. The third stage is bargaining, and what this stage looks like is that before loss, if this is happening, you know the loss is coming, you may try to do anything to try to prolong the prevention of the loss. You know, someone gets cancer, for example, they'll say, oh, you know what, I'll stop smoking immediately. Or I'll, you know, a lot of folks will give themselves to prayer, and try to make let's say a deal. You know, if you spare this person, I will do X and Y, or what have you, in whatever culture works for you. But bargaining is a stage in which, after we learn about the loss, you do anything to try to avoid the loss. And then once that loss has happened, if that's the situation, we'll do anything to try to avoid the pain. Maybe try to negotiate our way out of the hurt. And it sometimes can be difficult because this stage kind of keeps you in the past. When you're bargaining, you're trying to still make it so that that previous life can happen. And that's preventing us from moving forward. However, again, have compassion for yourself when you recognize you're in the bargaining stage, and when you're wishing, oh, I just wish this wasn't the case, or that this wasn't true, or that this loss, of whatever kind, whether it's a loss of a person, let's say a loss of a relationship, that that person hadn't left my life. This bargaining stage kind of keeps you in the past, and you try to figure out ways to make it work so that you can maintain your identity and who you felt like you were with these people, or that job, or that thing in your life. But bargaining, that's what that looks like. Next slide, Maria. The next stage is depression. This is probably the most recognized and obvious stage of grief, where you feel a great, deep sadness for yourself, for others, and grief enters your life at a very deep level. It's not just, and it depends on the situation and the type of loss. If, for example, if you're younger, you may have never experienced a loss, and it may be very effective to you. Again, that doesn't mean that if you're older that it makes loss much more easy, but having that little bit of experience and knowing that that's coming, and having a little more wisdom about life, and knowing that it's the human experience, can sometimes help you cope a little bit, which is part of what this type of knowledge that we're providing is hoping to do, inoculate against that a little bit. It's important to understand that depression is not a sign of mental illness. It's an appropriate response to great loss. When I was doing therapy with folks one-on-one in my practicum, when I was in graduate school for clinical psychology, and in life, I would realize that folks, when they start crying, often they would apologize. You know, oh, I'm sorry. You know, and it's maybe a cultural thing. But you may have been in a situation where someone started crying, and they said, you know, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry to be crying right now. Maybe they felt like they were causing a scene. And you should recognize that, and crying is it's part of your body's way to cope. You're have all this built up stress, and your body has decided to cope by crying. If you have ever been in a very hot car, or you're a Houstonian, for example, like I am, you in a very hot weather, what does your body do when you've had too much heat? It's you start to sweat, right? When your body experiences too much heat, stress from heat, it will begin to sweat to cool you down, because that's how it keeps you well. In the same situation, I would argue that crying helps your body kind of calm down. When you have a level of stress that goes too high, well, there's no sweating for your body, but what your body will do is cry, because crying is stress relieving. You might notice that it takes a lot of energy to cry too, and to be in that type of grief. Your body kind of wears itself down in doing that. So crying is a stress reliever, and it's very normal for that to happen during the depression stage. So be aware of that. Don't feel like you have to keep yourself from crying. I know there are cultural things at play, and that's just one thought to support your ideas, to support you if you consider that, you know, I feel like I'm crying too much, or what have you. And in this stage, one last thing I'll mention is that we do feel like you withdraw from life. You might feel like you're walking in a fog, that you're in intense sadness, you're just kind of wandering around, and you may be wondering if perhaps there's any point in going forward. You may have thoughts that, my life is pointless. What's the point of going on at all? And that's a very natural thought to have at this stage. And of course, if you feel like at this point that happens at a very intense level, that maybe you talk to somebody about that to help you manage the stress. You don't have to carry the burden alone. Knowing that this is part of the depression stage, it would be helpful for you to take note of that and ask and aggregate some help for you. And finally, the stage we hope to reach, not a stage that it ends at, but a stage that we hope to hit, is the acceptance stage. Again, we can hit the acceptance stage and kind of revert back sometimes, but at the acceptance stage, we often confuse the notion of being all right or okay with what happened, and that's not the case. Acceptance doesn't mean that you're okay with what happened. It just means that you accept what happened, as the title suggests. A lot of folks will say, I still feel the pain of the loss of my father, for example, or the very close loved one, or I still, I still think about this person every once in a while, maybe daily, and I still feel a little bit of that pain. But that we're not saying that in the acceptance stage you feel hunky-dory about it and you're never sad about it again. It just means that you have come to the realization that has occurred and that your life will change because of it, and you're willing to move on because of it. You may never like this reality, and it won't make it okay, but eventually we accept it and we live to learn with it. And that's what the acceptance stage is about. Okay, so again, this is a little quote here. You don't move on from grief, you move forward with and through the grief. So next stage there, Maria. Okay, so now that you know about grief, now that you know the stages and what the stages will look like, that's part of the help. So how can you cope with these things? Well, there are lots of different ways. Again, some may be specific to you or how you were raised or what you're used to. And what works for different people won't work for you necessarily. But here are some ideas that have been generally helpful for everyone. So it may be helpful to talk about the death of your loved one or the loss of whatever it is you lost. A lot of folks will clam up and say, you know what, if I talk about it, it's just going to put it out there. I'm going to remember again and become sad. But let me have you consider this. The more you talk about it, I would say kind of like a scary movie. If I showed you a scary movie the first time and things jumped out and spooked you, unless you have nerves of steel, you may say to yourself, okay, that was a pretty scary movie. But what if I showed that movie to you 50 times back to back to back? By the 10th time, you might say, okay, this is where the monster jumps out. Yep, there it is. This is where the ghoul comes out from under the bed. Yep, there it is. You wouldn't be so scared by the 10th time. And by the 50th time, you may say, oh, I'm so bored of this movie. Like, there's nothing this movie can do to scare me. I'm just so used to talking about it. And maybe in a way, talking about your loss can be the same way. There may be lots of folks and groups that you can talk about your loss with. And the more you do it, the more you process your feelings, the more you get that out there. And it's kind of like the scary movie. The more you do it, the more it seems to become a little normal that it has happened. If you never talked about it with anyone, every time that you would talk about it would be such a great thing. It could be such a impactful thing again to bring that up and be re-traumatized by it. However, if you talk about grief with lots of folks and you casually bring it up with folks that are willing to listen, that it could be helpful to you. So another thing is to accept your feelings. I'm a big proponent of this one. Fighting against pain is an uphill battle. If you know Greek mythology, you're like Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill and it just coming back down and doing it all over again. accepting your feelings, understanding what you're feeling, and saying, you know what, it's okay to feel these feelings. I recognize that I'm having them. That goes a long way to helping you get to that acceptance and healing stage. You don't want to fight against things. A lot of times that ends up coming out as anger. So accepting your feelings is a big time help. Taking care of yourself and your family. Realize that grieving is not just a mental process where you just feel different feelings. It will physically affect you, and it will affect your routine. A lot of folks sometimes have a network of people that will bring by dishes and things so they don't have to cook. The reason that's so helpful is because your body just gets tired. All this grieving causes a lot of fatigue, and your brain's kind of foggy. It's hard to do the normal routine you would normally do and cook and things like that. So recognize that you need to take care of yourself and shower and eat and do all those things that your body and your livelihood still needs. Also, reach out to others for help with dealing with loss. There have been such great strides in helping folks, helping deal with the stigma behind mental health and the idea behind grieving by yourself. It's not something you have to do either. There are so many supports out there for folks that don't necessarily have to be your own friends or family or neighbors. There are groups out there and people that meet for all types of situations. You know, the death of a loved one from cancer is a specific group. The death of a loved one from suicide, for example, is a specific group. You know, folks that have lost a relationship, folks that have lost their job. There are all types of different people that understand your situation you are going through, and finding those groups and meeting with them either virtually or once you feel comfortable meeting in person can be very helpful to help you deal with that. And again, remember to celebrate the lives of your loved ones. And again, if we're talking about a different situation, to remember to celebrate all the things that you still have going on as far as affirmations go. And it's okay to feel happy when you are feeling happy thinking about that person. There's two sides to everything. The light can't exist without the dark. So if you're considering how sad you are about having lost someone, it's fair to also consider all the positives that they brought into your life, and why you're so sad is because of how happy perhaps this person made you. It could be a way to think about that. Next slide, Maria. Okay, so when you're grieving, let's say during the holidays, I just want to make sure, and then there are many different holidays. And the reason why this is a specific slide is because that's a time when often those losses are felt the most, because family is all together, and now you had an identity, an idea about what that situation looked like when your whole family gets together, and now that person's not necessarily there. And maybe they were a big part of that, or just having them there was part of what it meant to have everybody together, for example. Or maybe it was just you two, and now that's a very big change. So when you're grieving during the holidays, again, this may reintroduce some of that grieving pain. And so just this slide just wants to serve to remind you and be aware that that could happen. And that's just fine for that. There's no need to fight against it. Just know that everyone is going to grieve differently, especially when a holiday is very specific to your culture or to your family, how you do things. You feel free to tell folks what you need, and it's okay if you aren't up to celebrating the way you have in the past. You can change your mind last minute, or you can let others help. And this slide just serves to remind you that while we're in May right now, as those different holidays come up, 4th of July and winter holidays, that things will maybe trigger you, and you may feel that little bit of grief again. And that's okay to discuss that with others. Okay, next slide, Maria. And so, of course, in talking about all this, we also talk about the COVID-19 pandemic and the losses that have come from that. Loss has always been a part of of human history forever, and it will be forever going forward. And it just feels a little different right now because the COVID-19 virus is novel to us. We've had other viruses, and we've fought against them historically, and the COVID-19 is something that has been very sudden and novel to us, different. And the way it affects folks is also very difficult to deal with. You know, that it deals with your breathing, and it puts you in the hospital and what have you. So if you're someone that has lost someone due to COVID-19, there are groups and conference calls and things you can join for helping to process that as well. Like I discussed before, there are different groups, and this is one area that has also grown because of necessity. Lots of folks have been affected or know someone that has been affected by COVID-19. So ask family and friends to, again, you're doing the things to talk about this and process, and allowing yourself to feel those feelings at their fullest, even if they're difficult feelings. So remember to ask family and friends to share stories about loved ones, maybe pictures. They can always do this virtually over a computer. If you're not that's technically inclined, you can always have someone help you with that, so you can get access to all those things, all that media, so that you can help put together, you know, information and things that help remind you about that person. You can also coordinate a date, and maybe create a date for family and friends to honor your loved ones virtually, especially if you're still someone that's and we're going CDC guidelines here. If you're someone that's not meeting in groups yet for safety reasons, visiting with those folks, if you're not vaccinated yet, you may be considering, you know, it's very hard to grieve, especially when I can't do it in person. So there are lots of ways you can do that virtually. Through the way we're doing right now through this web meeting is one way. So reach out virtually or for ideas to different folks in your family for different ways that you may be able to do those things that you would have typically done when we're not socially distancing, so that you can still feel like you appropriately grieve for your loved one. Okay. Again, if you have lost a loved one during the COVID-19 pandemic, there are different ways to honor them. Another idea is take part in an activity that may be outdoors, like planting a tree or preparing a favorite meal, and just whatever it is you're processing, and you're talking about it, and you're thinking about it. You're not avoiding, and you are doing those significant things that you would have done with that loved one, or you would have appreciated to have done with that loved one. Okay, and this slide is also one of my very favorite slides, and it talks about self-care. What can you do for yourself during these times when your body is just exerting all this energy to grieve, when you are feeling all these very intense feelings? So, well, some things you can do is get your body moving, even though it doesn't want to move. So, for example, you can take a walk, especially if that's in nature. There's lots of research showing that when we connect with nature, it can be very positive for us. So, just taking a walk and moving, getting your heartbeat going, can make your brain, as I like to say, make the happy chemicals, right? It's not necessarily going to be the cure for what you need, but a little exercise, a little movement can be a big help. Also, taking a nap and resting. Again, folks don't realize how much energy grieving exudes. So taking a nap can be very helpful. Know that you don't have to say yes to everything. You may be asked to do different things, to make different appearances, and you know, this may not be the time that you're ready to make decisions, because your brain may be foggy, because you're feeling such intense pain. And we're not trying to avoid a situation. You just may not have capacity to do certain things at a time, and it's okay to say no. Be kind to yourself by saying no to some of those activities, or you know, telling folks that you're not ready yet, and that can be okay for you. Also, listening to music, and that's another very common stress relief. Lots of ways you can do that. Reminding you that crying is a very natural behavior, and it's okay to do that. And also refocusing your brain. If you are feeling that brain fog from grieving so much, you may participate in an activity that helps refocus your brain. You may say to yourself, I'm just going to start this hobby or re-engage in a hobby that I'm used to, because that is something that stimulates my mind. Maybe you play a game of chess with someone, or plan an activity with friends and family. And lastly, we ask that you know your limitations, and those limitations may change when you're grieving. And sometimes you may not know what your limitations are until you reach that point. But again, that's part of saying no. Once you reach that limit, or you may say to yourself, okay, I've done all I could for today, and I think I did a great job, and I'm just going to say no to any other activities and give myself a rest. So all of these are just a few ways. This isn't, of course, the definitive list, but just a few ways that you can help yourself and cope. So this next slide, we want to talk about when to seek professional help. There is an official manual for mental health providers called the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual. And what it does is list, just like a doctor would have for the influenza and polio and all those diseases of the body, it lists different mental health disorders. I will say that their grieving is not in there because it's a very complicated process and it's very natural, but complicated grief is. Most grief will be very painful and uncomplicated, but if you feel like your grief is such that you don't personally think you can deal with the grief, if you're feeling like grieving is driving you to use excessive amounts of drugs or alcohol, if you become extremely depressed, more than you feel that you can bear, if you have long-term depression that interferes with your daily life, and some folks are like, well, I don't know what long-term is. Let's say it goes on for months and months. And the important part is it's interfering with your daily life. A lot of folks can feel sad and go back eventually to what they were doing. But if you feel like it's just not going away and it is interfering in what you're doing, it's affecting you and your day-to-day. And also if you're having suicidal thoughts, these are all situations in which I would recommend, it is recommended that you speak to a professional. This can be a clergy member, someone from your faith. There are mental health specialists like a licensed counselor, a licensed social worker, or family marriage therapist. This can be a support group. It doesn't have to be a one-on-one. This can be a group. There again, introducing the idea there are lots of groups for specific situations that either can meet face-to-face or virtually, and those are helpful too. They're usually led by a professional. And then, of course, we are someone that you can talk to about any of these things. So, Maria, if you go to the next couple slides here. Just want to let you know that we are available to help with these things as well. As Maria first mentioned, we're crisis counselors, and sometimes grieving can cause a crisis situation for you, either mentally or in your life situationally. So if you don't see a professional, if you prefer to just talk to someone over the phone, there are many ways to do that, and we do that as well. And Maria, do you want to reintroduce ourselves here and let folks know what they can do if they want to contact us?
Yes, thank you. That was a great presentation. Thank you for sharing. And I know we all have experienced some type of grief during this pandemic. So I hope this was very helpful and beneficial to you all. But again, part of our program is we provide free, confidential and counseling services for anybody who has been affected by COVID or the winter storm. And if you ask yourself, well, I haven't actually been affected. Well, and we have in some form, whether we lost somebody, whether we lost a job, whether we got sick, we have been affected in some form.
I would argue we've even lost our way of life and the activities that we did day to day.
Absolutely.
That's
we can't interact like we used to. I mean, things are starting to open back up, but we're still very cautious about how we're doing things. We're definitely not back to where we were at prior to the pandemic. And as Frank, stated that, this is a crisis when you're dealing with grief, and that's why we're there for, and we're here to provide those, not just somebody, that's there to listen, but we can also provide resources in your community as needed. But there's the number, it's the 1-800-643-0967, and you want to press number 8. Is that correct, Frank? And it'll take you right to our the Texas Recovering Together Counseling Crisis Program. We are there if you need us. I didn't know if there was any more. We also have the state flyer, real quick. It's the mental health support line phone number. So that's the 833-986-1919. And that's the Texas Health and Human Services.
So this is all to say, folks, that you don't have to do this alone, and all those groups and things we talked about, that's something we can help point you towards. So that's part of what we're here to do, not just instruct, but also follow up by helping you out with that. So again, thanks for having us. I really enjoy talking about these topics and informing folks. And if you have any questions regarding any of what we said, you don't necessarily have to call in because you have a crisis. If you want to follow up on any of these things and talk more specifically about your situation, we're happy to do that. So again, I'll turn it back to Esther. Thanks for having us.
Hey, well, thank you guys so much. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you, Frank. Thank you so much, Mary. And I'm sure our audience got all the information that they need as you all continue to provide free counseling services to anyone in crisis here in the city of Texas. And I just want to say thank you so much for working hard to bring those resources to the community, because a lot of people are in need of it. Just like your presentation stated, people have lost so many things. We would usually go into the community in the past and bring resources and seniors together, but we had to put all of that on hold because, like we all know, seniors are the most vulnerable to this pandemic. So we've seen from loneliness to depression, so many things have resulted due from the pandemic, so there's been so many loss, there's been so many loss. So I'm so glad that you guys were able to highlight how people can manage their grief and continue to live effectively until things go back to normal. So thank you guys so much for doing an awesome job. So we'll see you guys back on the June the 2nd for another episode of Live with Senior Trade Show. Until then, thank you so much for coming on. Bye. So thank you everyone that tuned in today to join us on another episode of Live with Senior Trade Show. I hope that session was able to benefit you in one way or the other. I personally experienced loss due to COVID, and it hasn't been easy adjusting to the fact that I would never be able to interact with that loved one again. But there's different steps to grieving, from accepting the fact to just adjusting, and just finding effective way to grieve, has been really, really helpful. I just pray that you all continue to stay safe out there until life gets back to normal. Thank you so much for tuning in and supporting us here on Live with Senior Trade Show. We'll be back on June 2nd for another episode, and we also will be partnering with the Texas Gulf Center to bring you another hot topic. If you are a service provider in the community and you would love to partner with us to share your resource with our audience, we have our information on the screen. Feel free to send us an email. Feel free to give us a call so we can see if you're good fits for our audience. Again, my name is Esther Iwunze with Live with Senior Trade Show. Until then, thank you so much for tuning in and have a good day. Bye-bye.